Looking back, I still shiver at the memory of my old neighbor, Mr. Greaves. This was a few years ago when I was living in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else, and life ticks by in a peaceful rhythm. But there was always an exception to every rule, and in our case, it was Mr. Greaves and his ominous house down the street. I'm telling you, the rumors were true. That man was like something out of a nightmare. It all started during a sweltering summer. There was something about the way Mr. Greaves' house stood, almost hidden by the overgrown trees and bushes. It had this air of mystery, a shadow that seemed to stretch longer in the daylight. People said he was a recluse, barely stepping outside his decaying fortress. Some claimed he was into dark arts, black magic, witchcraft, the whole deal. Of course, those were just stories. But stories have a way of getting under your skin, and curiosity can be a pesky thing. So, one sunny afternoon, I decided to muster up the courage to pay Mr. Greaves a visit. I figured, why not? Maybe he was just misunderstood. As I walked down his weed-choked path, though, an eerie sense of foreboding crept over me. The garden was an unruly mess, and the windows of his house seemed like empty, hollow eyes staring right through you. I knocked on the door, and for what felt like an eternity, there was no answer. Just when I was about to give up, the door creaked open, and there he stood, Mr. Greaves himself. His appearance was like something out of a horror movie. Pale, almost translucent skin, framed by long, unkempt gray hair. His eyes were the most unsettling part, a cold, steel gray that seemed to pierce right through you. He invited me in, and that's when things took a turn for the surreal. The inside of his house was dimly lit, almost like a perpetual twilight. The air was thick with an odd scent, a mix of dried herbs and something else, something metallic. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The walls of his living room were adorned with an odd collection of paintings, twisted, macabre scenes that seemed to dance in the low light. Mr. Greaves led me to a dusty, threadbare sofa, and as we began to talk, he spun these elaborate tales. Ancient rituals, hidden secrets, and places beyond the understanding of regular folks like you and me. He spoke in riddles, his words cryptic and enigmatic, leaving me more confused than enlightened. Every so often, he'd let out a chuckle, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. It was as if the very room was echoing with malevolence. Hours seemed to slip away, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, a sense of panic began to gnaw at me. I had to get out of there. The darkness that cloaked his house was becoming suffocating. I mustered up a feeble excuse about needing to leave, and that's when he smiled. Oh, that smile, it was like a warning, a harbinger of danger that I couldn't quite comprehend. Days turned into weeks, and an unshakable feeling of being watched settled over me like a heavy fog. Shadows seemed to writhe and dance, playing tricks on my mind. And on more than one occasion, I could have sworn I saw Mr. Greaves peering out from behind the curtains of his windows, those cold gray eyes fixed intently on me. My once idyllic neighborhood had transformed into a labyrinth of secrets, and I was trapped right in the middle. One restless night, consumed by curiosity, I found myself standing outside Mr. Greaves' house once again. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the scene. I couldn't resist the urge to peek inside, to unravel the mysteries that lay hidden within those walls. And so, with cautious steps, I ventured inside. The air inside was heavy, charged with an otherworldly energy. I navigated the dim corridors, my heart pounding in my chest. As I explored deeper into the house, I stumbled upon a room that seemed frozen in time. Strange objects adorned a table, feathers, bones, and an ancient book covered in cryptic symbols. But what sent a chill down my spine was a photograph of me. A gasp escaped my lips, and in that very moment, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, and there he was, Mr. Greaves, standing like a specter in the darkness. His voice slithered through the air, a hissing whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "I warned you, child," he muttered, his words carrying a weight of centuries-old secrets. I bolted from the room, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I raced down the corridors, desperate to escape the clutches of that sinister house. Behind me, I could hear the sound of footsteps, a haunting echo that only fueled my fear. Bursting through the front door, I sprinted into the night, my heart pounding, my breath ragged. I joined my friends, who had gathered in the safety of the moonlit street. Their faces were etched with concern, and it was then that I realized the screaming, the bone-chilling, blood-curdling screams that had pierced the night. The source of those tormented cries remained a mystery, but deep down, I knew. I knew that I had ventured into the realm of something beyond human comprehension. In the end, the neighborhood returned to its tranquil facade, and Mr. Greaves' house stood as a silent sentinel, a keeper of the darkness that lurked within. The memory of that encounter still lingers, a haunting reminder that some mysteries are best left undisturbed, and some neighbors, no matter how curious we may be, are best kept at a distance. I moved into my new house on Oakwood Street about 3 months ago. It seemed like a peaceful neighborhood, and I was excited to finally have a place of my own. The house was small but cozy, nestled between 2 other houses, both of whose occupants seemed friendly enough. Everything was fine until the day I met my next-door neighbor, Mr. Thompson. He lived in the house to my right, a slightly run-down place that looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in decades. The first time I saw him, he was standing in his yard, staring at me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I waved, trying to be neighborly, but he didn't respond. He just kept staring, his eyes locked onto mine. I quickly retreated back into my house, feeling a sense of unease settle in my stomach. Maybe he was just having a bad day, I thought, trying to dismiss the encounter. Days turned into weeks, and I began to notice strange things happening. Every time I looked out my window, I would see Mr. Thompson standing in his yard, always staring in my direction. It didn't matter if it was morning, afternoon, or evening, he was always there, watching. I started to feel like a prisoner in my own home, constantly aware of his presence. One evening, as the sun was setting and casting long shadows across the street, I decided to muster up the courage to confront him. I walked over to his house and knocked on the door. After what felt like an eternity, he finally answered, his expression blank. "Hi, I'm your neighbor from next door," I began awkwardly. "I just wanted to introduce myself and say hello." He continued to stare at me, his silence unnerving. Finally, in a voice that sent a chill down my spine, he said, "I know who you are. I've been watching you." My heart raced, and I took a step back, suddenly regretting my decision to approach him. "Watching me? What do you mean?" He didn't answer, just continued to study me with those cold, unblinking eyes. Feeling more uncomfortable by the second, I mumbled a quick goodbye and practically ran back to my house. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining his eyes on me, even in the darkness of my bedroom. I decided to do a little digging to see if I could find out more about Mr. Thompson. It didn't take long to uncover a disturbing history. Neighbors told stories of how he had lived on Oakwood Street for decades, always keeping to himself and rarely interacting with anyone. Rumors circulated about his reclusive nature and strange habits. Some said they had seen him wandering the streets at odd hours, muttering to himself. As the weeks went by, my anxiety grew. I started hearing whispers late at night, faint voices that seemed to come from just outside my window. When I looked, there was never anyone there. I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the feeling of being watched never went away. Then, one day, I received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten and had no return address. I opened it cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The words on the page sent a wave of terror coursing through me. "Stay away from Mr. Thompson. He's not what he seems. You're in danger." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Who could have sent this? Was it some kind of sick joke? I tried to brush it off, but the fear gnawed at me. I decided to confide in my other neighbors, hoping they could shed some light on the situation. To my surprise, they all seemed just as fearful of Mr. Thompson as I was. They spoke in hushed tones, recounting strange occurrences and unexplainable events that had plagued the neighborhood for years. One neighbor claimed to have seen Mr. Thompson standing outside during a thunderstorm, his arms raised as if he were beckoning the lightning. Another said they had witnessed him digging a deep hole in his backyard in the middle of the night. As the stories piled up, I couldn't deny the truth any longer. Mr. Thompson was a source of unease and terror in our quiet neighborhood. But what could we do? None of us wanted to confront him directly, fearing the consequences of provoking his anger. Months passed, and the feeling of dread only intensified. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every shadow. The whispers at night grew louder, and I began to see fleeting glimpses of figures outside my window. Then, one fateful night, I awoke to a chilling sight. Mr. Thompson was standing at the foot of my bed, his eyes fixed on mine. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed with fear as he leaned closer, his breath cold against my skin. "You're mine now," he whispered, his voice sending waves of terror through me. I woke up the next morning in a cold sweat, convinced it had all been a nightmare. But as I looked around my room, I saw the unmistakable imprint of footprints in the carpet, leading from the window to the foot of my bed. I knew then that Mr. Thompson was more than just a creepy neighbor, he was something far more sinister. And as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that his malevolent presence was closing in on me, a darkness from which there was no escape. In the days that followed, Mr. Thompson vanished from the neighborhood without a trace. The whispers and shadows began to fade, and a sense of normalcy returned to my life. I often find myself staring out my window, wondering if Mr. Thompson's malevolent presence will ever return.